Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country's forces are making gains against Russian troops. They've retaken several villages around the eastern city of Kharkiv. Despite the small victories, he warns of a long fight ahead. United States intelligence says Russia is ready for a protracted war. Ukrainian troops say they need more anti-tank weapons to continue clawing back victory.
Ukrainian forces taking back control in villages on the outskirts of Kharkiv. As units press forward with their counteroffensive, they encounter a trail of wreckage from Russia's invasion. Ukrainian soldiers say Russian forces fired on civilian convoys as they were trying to flee the fighting in frontline areas like here. Destruction, too, by Ukrainian fighters. This Russian tank, one of many blown up with the state-of-the-art equipment.
The weapons are helping us a lot, especially the anti-tank ones. I wish we could get more of them. We use the weapons for specific targets, and here you see the results. If we had more weapons, we would get more results.
On the diplomatic front, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with the foreign ministers from Germany and the Netherlands in the capital, Kyiv. Annalena Baerbock is the first member of the German government to visit Ukraine since the war began.
We will continue to support a European and free Ukraine in humanitarian, financial, technological, political, and energy terms. And not only today, but also and above all tomorrow, in the long term.
But when asked about Kyiv's ambition to join the EU, the German foreign minister said there should be no false promises about shortcuts on the road to full membership.
I spoke to our chief political editor, Michaela Küffner, here in Berlin, and our correspondent in Lviv, Ami Enesev, and started by asking him how Baerbock's words were received in Ukraine.
Well, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba described it as a turning point for Germany. He said that when bombs hit Kyiv, there was also a big explosion in Germany in terms of foreign policy, with reversing their long-standing stance on weapons deliveries to conflict zones, which is what happened in Ukraine. Now Germany is among those countries delivering the most and most powerful weapons to Ukraine. So the political class is certainly grateful and in the know, and they understand that Germany has been evolving on this issue and changing its mind, especially since they've seen that the reaction from Russia is not quite what they expected. In other words, Germany had long been worried about escalating the conflict by sending heavy weapons, which does not seem to have happened. Russian forces have moved mostly to the east. But I would also add that most people on the street are not following the day-to-day visits by top political brass from around Europe. Almost every day a new politician or foreign minister visits Ukraine. So I think most Ukrainians just want the humanitarian and weapons supplies, and they're not really keen on understanding who they're getting it from.
OK, what's important is that something is coming and that relations are on the upturn. Michaela, Ukraine called this visit an historical turning point in relations with Germany. Do you agree?
Well, it certainly appears to have diffused what was actually diplomatic tension after the German president, who wanted to travel a few weeks ago, was essentially disinvited. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz hasn't visited yet. He said he would wait until the president had visited. Now that looks like it's off the cards. I asked him yesterday whether this has now ended this back and forth, and he said that this visit essentially and what's taken place so far is a good basis for future relations. But most importantly, what Ukrainians got from the foreign minister directly is the pledge that, yes, Ukraine belongs to the European Union and that it will achieve full EU membership, but cautioning that there will be no shortcuts. So that could still be a very, very long road indeed. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, said it could take decades, but it is a full pledge with the full weight of the EU's largest economy behind it.
Well, hopefully years, not decades. But Michaela, what about this promise from Baerbock for more support? What sort of support is she talking about?
Well, beyond that political support, which essentially the German Chancellor will have to fulfill, who said it was an interesting idea what Emmanuel Macron had proposed, that there could be a political community, something in between a country en road to full membership, an actual full membership that could also open prospects for post-Brexit UK. More concretely, she said there would be support in maintaining or getting evidence for war crimes that have been committed in the region. And also the German embassy has been reopened. Again, Germany wasn't particularly fast in doing that, but that is a clear signal and actually clear facts on the ground that Germany is fully supporting Ukraine, however long this may take.
OK, well, politics aside, Armian, how much of a difference is all that international support we're seeing coming in from around the world? How much of a difference is that making?
As we've heard, Ukrainian troops say they've taken areas around Kharkiv and are pushing Russian troops back. Now, that is the second largest city in Ukraine, a very important area and not part of the Russian-occupied Donbas. So it's very much a prized possession of Ukraine. They want to keep that city, and it's important for winning the war in the long term. And as U.S. officials have said, artillery, so this is weapons that you can fire from the ground like tanks and howitzers, which are coming from Germany. They're going to be very important. But as we've also heard, this war could drag on for a lot longer than many expected at the very beginning, certainly longer than Russia expected. And in that sense, humanitarian aid is going to be very important. A lot of people in the country are surviving just off of that. Germany is one of the top suppliers of humanitarian aid, but a lot is coming from EU countries, the US and the UK as well. And that is something that those imports need to continue in order for people to continue their lives here.
Armian Esser for us in Lviv, Michael Küffner in Berlin for us. Thank you very much to both of you. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 2.5 months. The question, how much longer? According to intelligence sources in the United States, this could be just the beginning. US National Intelligence Director Avril Haines believes Russia is preparing for a protracted conflict. She warns senators that President Putin still intends to achieve goals beyond Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, adding he could turn to more drastic means as the war continues. For more on that grim outlook from the US head of intelligence, I'm joined now by Frank Ledwidge. He's a former intelligence officer in the British military and lectures in strategy and law at the University of Portsmouth. What's meant by more drastic, do you think?
What Avril Haines spoke about yesterday was, amongst other matters, perhaps extension of the war, not only in terms of length, but in terms of the domains in which it's being fought. What we may be seeing is an extension into the cyber domain or possibly even space. But one thing which the Americans are also beginning to talk about, which is slightly disturbing, of course, for everybody, is the possibility that low-yield nuclear weapons could be considered. And that's a huge question. We shouldn't be blithe about that. But there's more than one way of escalation like that. But what we've got here now, Ben, is an attritional war, and that suits Ukraine far more than Russia. It's a big problem for Russia, a long war, I think.
Why does that suit the Ukrainians?
Well, for a start, Russia is coming to the end now of its manpower pool. We've been seeing for a long time that they've been scraping the barrel to try and find trained manpower. So what they're going to be looking to now are their conscripts, which are this particular tranche is about halfway through its training. They were called up in February, and that'll go on. So what we're going to see is a deprofessionalization of it, if they could be even less professional, of the Russian armed forces as the war goes on. They've got to the end of the road there. What's happening with Ukraine is that its army is becoming more professional, better armed, better structured, and more experienced. So in the longer term, the augurs look more favourable for Ukraine in that respect, I would suggest.
What about Putin's objectives at this point? Have they changed? I mean, do we have any indication as to what may constitute victory for him?
Yes, Ben. Well, the victory speech the other day, which was common or garden, really, it was something of a damp squib, wasn't it? But what we did hear there was the Donbas mentioned 5 times and Crimea once. Ukraine, by the way, the word Ukraine, as I recall, it wasn't mentioned once. But anyhow, So we're seeing a focusing down of the objectives to Donbas. But as your piece before suggested, that isn't the limit of the objectives. And I would suggest that there is or remains a historical objective, which is that southern part of Ukraine. The Russians used to call it Novorossiya. In fact, there was a Republic of Novorossiya declared for about 3 weeks in 2014. Russian history is very conscious of this back to the 18th century. And I would suggest that sort of band, that coastal territory of Ukraine is also it would be the main objective. They're not going to give that up without a fight, let's put it that way.
Retired Lieutenant General told me last night that the US is talking about winning this war, and they're talking about taking back those eastern parts as well as Crimea. What do you think about that?
There's no doubt that Ukraine has the edge now. Yesterday, the Ukrainian army took territories very near the Russian border, up near Kharkiv, which was hinted at again in an earlier piece. Now, the significance of that is twofold. First of all, so that in other words, Ukrainians are already counterattacking. First of all, they're now within artillery range of Russian railway supply routes to the Donbas area. That's a big problem for Russian logistics, as if they haven't got enough already. Secondly, they're now having to redirect forces out of the Donbas, out of an already stalled operation. But to return to your point, or your question, the Ukrainians are certainly shaping for a major counterattack, and that's likely to take place, I would assess, and not only me, in probably towards July. And the Russians are going to have to, at some point, their current offensive is going to run out. It's going to culminate, as the military people say. It's going to run out of steam. At that point, the Ukrainians will be ready to counterattack, and then they'll be ready to retake ground, especially down there in the south. And that's where we're really going to see some heavy fighting towards the end of the year. So yes, a long war.
You heard it from Frank Ledwidge. He was an intelligence officer in the British military and lectures at the University of Portsmouth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.